Hello everyone, today I'm talking to you about some work completed recently looking at the role of two areas of the frontal cortex in decision strategies. This work was run in conjunction with Tim Ballard, Dave Sewell and Paul Dux, and Tim and Dave in particular did a lot of computational modelling that you will see as I run through it. Okay, so decision strategies. We used, to look at decision strategies, a very well-known phenomenon called the speed accuracy trade-off, the SAT for short, which does exactly what it says on the tin. So increased likelihood of an error as the time allotted for a decision is reduced. So there's just this inherent trade-off between how quickly you can respond and how accurate you'll be. It's robust, it's ubiquitous, it's probably something that we all face a lot in everyday life. And we can think of the exact balance we take between speed and accuracy as a form of decision strategy. So that's what I'm referring to as a decision strategy in the title. So whether we prioritize speed, prioritize accuracy, or balance somewhere between the two. And speed accuracy trade-off effects have been looked at a lot with computational modelling, particularly evidence accumulation models such as drift diffusion or linear ballistic accumulator models. So particularly the LBA, linear ballistic accumulator, you can find papers by Scott Brown, Andrew Heathcote, particularly their 2008 paper. So in a very basic nutshell, these models suggest that there are three key sort of time points of processing. There's initial non-decision processing of particularly some sort of perceptual information. You have then a central decision component, and then you have a late sort of output processing component, something like motor output. This central decision process has multiple components. Two of the key ones are processes of evidence accumulation, and also some sort of threshold, also called caution. So evidence accumulation here, the images depict someone making a decision between two different options, a left or a right response. You can see there's accumulator for left, accumulator for right. So this is just evidence that's being accumulated towards each of those possible decision outcomes, decision options. And here left wins because it hits a threshold amount of evidence first. And when that amount of evidence, that threshold is hit, that caution level, then the decision is essentially made and the output is processed. And you can have a faster response if you lower caution, so you bring that threshold down, which means you need less evidence for your decision to be made, so you hit it faster. But because you're gathering less evidence, arguably you're more likely to make an error. And indeed, a lot of theory has suggested that it is actually lowering this caution which is responsible for the speed accuracy trade-off effect. So it's where you set your caution is essentially determining that speed accuracy trade-off. There is some debate about that. There's some suggestion that actually evidence accumulation plays a role, and it might be more complex than that, but there is certainly evidence that these models can contribute to how speed accuracy trade-off occurs, and caution or threshold seems to be playing a particularly prominent role. In terms of what's going on in the brain, neuroimaging has implicated three regions in the speed accuracy trade-off that particularly seem to be involved and important. There's the pre-supplementary motor area, or generally known as the pre-SMA. I will refer to this frequently through the rest of the talk as the superior medial frontal cortices, because we use electrical brain stimulation, which affects a relatively large area of the cortex. So whilst we're targeting the pre-SMA, we're likely stimulating that larger superior medial frontal cortex of area. There's also the prefrontal cortex, which particularly seems to be left hemisphere, and there's also the striatum. So in the study I'm presenting the data for today, we wanted to particularly look at the role of the left prefrontal cortex and the superior medial frontal cortex in decision strategies. We used a double-blind pre-registered approach, and we used computational modelling to assess accumulation and caution or threshold in relation to different decision strategies. We had two groups of participants, one per target brain region. So one, we targeted the left prefrontal cortex, and in a different group of subjects, we targeted the superior medial frontal cortex. That element of the study wasn't double blind because that's pretty tricky to do. But each participant came in for 2 sessions, an active stimulation session where we had cathodal over the target region, and a sham stimulation session, and that was double blinded. The task we asked people to do was a dot motion task. So there's a circular patch on the screen with dots that are moving in it. Some of the dots are moving randomly and some are moving coherently in one direction. That direction might be towards the left of centre or towards the right of centre. Initially, participants completed some thresholding, so they were around 70% accurate with their performance. And that thresholding varied the level of coherence, so the number of dots, the portion of dots that were moving coherently to the left or to the right versus the portion that were just moving randomly. After thresholding, they completed the task for, I think, about 40 minutes. They completed 3 different types of blocks, so they had different instructions, and they alternated between these blocks multiple times through that 40-minute period. Some of the blocks they were told to prioritise speed, some they were told to prioritise accuracy, and some they were told to try and equally balance the two. So the stimulation was for 20 minutes. It was offline, so it was applied for 20 minutes whilst participants were at rest, just with their eyes open, not doing anything. The 20 minutes included 30 seconds ramping up and down. It was set at 0.7 milliamps with 5x5 electrodes using a neurocon system. And as I already said, it was cathodal stimulation over the target region. The reference electrode was placed in the same area for both of the 2 stimulation groups. So you can see the montage there in the diagram towards the left. The top is for the left prefrontal cortex and the bottom is for the superior medial frontal cortex. So with the analysis, we initially, having run the modelling, did a manipulation check just to make sure, just for those sham sessions, that participants were modulating their performance with the different instruction blocks, with the different instructions we gave across blocks. So you can see here on the left-hand side, it's a graph just showing the level of response caution, also known as threshold. And for the accuracy condition, their caution was particularly high. For their speed focus condition, their caution was particularly low, with the mixed sort of beautifully sitting in between. So that's a nice confirmation that we're having, as expected, strong effects on their performance, particularly their caution, with this manipulation. And for discriminability, which is evidence accumulation rates, particularly the difference between the correct and error accumulator, which is a pretty typical way of looking at evidence accumulation rates, we didn't see any effect with instruction. So it was pretty much the same. There was certainly no reliable differences between those 3 different conditions. So we seem to have a caution-based effect, which makes some sense for our task in the literature. In terms of the effective stimulation, when we collapse across those 3 different blocks, we find quite a strong effect from stimulating both regions on caution. So this graph is showing the difference in caution between the active and sham conditions. So a positive number means there was an increase in caution with stimulation, and a negative number means there's a decrease in caution with stimulation. And you can see that whilst stimulating both of those 2 regions is having an effect, it's having an effect in opposing directions. When we break that down into the different instruction block, we can see that this is interacting with the conditions that we gave people. So the accuracy focused block shows the strongest effect for both of them, with less effect, although still reliable, for the mixed condition and the speed focused condition. In terms of discriminability, so it's the evidence accumulation, we found generally a bit of an increase for stimulating both regions. There was a slight increase in the rate of evidence accumulation regardless of where we stimulated, and the effect didn't vary across the different instruction blocks. They were pretty comparable across the 3, so none of those differences were reliable. So to summarise, stimulating both the superior medial frontal cortex and the left prefrontal cortex modulated decision-making, and these effects interacted with the decision strategies. They were in opposing directions for the 2 regions, and I think we can be quite confident in saying both of these regions, broadly they're affected by stimulation, appear to be causally involved in decision strategies, although the precise roles, whilst likely to be distinct, we still need to do a bit of work to pin that down. So that's everything. Thanks very much for listening.